Welcome to Last Words here in the pit. This week, guitar music is back in town. Did it ever go anywhere? All this and more with our guest Shane McCarthy from Wayfarer.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Last Words presented by The Pit. I'm one of your co-hosts, Doc Coyle of the band Bad Wolves and host of the X-Men podcast.
I'm Katy Irizarry of Season of Mist and Loudwire.com.
And I'm Jordan Olds from 2 Minutes to Late Night.
So today we're joined by Shane McCarthy. He plays in the band Wayfarer. They're a black metal band from Denver. They have an upcoming album on October 16th. So Shane, tell us a little bit about the record. Have you faced any delays? Was this something you released early or later, or has basically this year in any way affected this album release? And also just tell us a little bit about this record.
Yeah, big time on the delays and things happening to us. We were supposed to fly. We did the last record in New York with Colin Marston, and we had it booked to do that again. We were supposed to fly, I think, March 30th to go out there. Thought it would be okay for a while in terms of like, oh, we'll just push it back like a month or so. I'm sure things will be fine. And then it became pretty evident pretty fast that it was not going to be fine at all. So we decided instead of waiting a year to go to New York that we would just figure it out locally. So Isaac had recorded a couple times with Pete DeBoer with Blood Incantation at World Famous Studios. So we ended up just going there and tracking it there in like mid-June instead. But we definitely got pushed back 3 months for recording because of the virus, and then ended up mixing it remotely, which wasn't the plan. And honestly, it kind of worked out because we probably weren't near as ready as we should have been in March, which is always the case. We like set a date and we're like, yeah, we'll be fine. And then a month before, we realized how we are going into the studio. So this kind of bought us some time and probably made it better overall.
That's awesome. So in a way, it kind of worked out in the end for you guys.
So on Tuesday, an article came out on the New York Times saying that guitars are back, baby. Apparently in the quarantine times, there have been record sales at Fender and a lot of different major guitar companies, just because people are, I think that's cool. It's cool that people are buying guitars right now, but I don't really ever subscribe to the like blank is dead, or rock and roll is dead. In that same regard, like I've never heard anyone go like the piano is dead. What do you guys think?
I have a lot of thoughts on this. Not only rock music, but just popular culture in general. And I think if you look at the phases, I would call it the kind of Black Keydsification or the Imagine Dragonsification of popular rock music, which is that it's not just guitar as being like a lead instrument, it's more like the tonality of it. So if you listen to like the last Foo Fighters record, the last like Queens of Stone Age record, they kind of just the tonality of that really mid-rangey, punchy guitar tones kind of went more in the background. It's more of a sub kind of sound. And Matt Bellamy from Muse even came out and said, he thought guitar was dead because a lot of just what was happening in popular culture is moving away from that. But ironically, you had all these kind of like more emo rapper people, whether it's like Juice WRLD or XXXTentacion, like they're actually putting more guitars in their music. And so it's this weird thing of like, yeah, it's not cool, but it is cool. And I agree with you too, like where it never really went away, but at the same time, it just kind of takes up a different space. So it's, listen, anytime something like this happens where it's like guitar sales go through the roof, I think it's a good thing. And I think we should just be happy. How that's going to present itself in popular culture kind of remains to be seen.
So, I totally agree with you guys that guitars, they never went away. They've never been dead. This article says guitars are back as if it was something that was gone, that was forgotten, that went away. I just think whoever wrote this was completely out of touch. That's clearly not been the case. But on the other hand, I'm excited about this. I think it's indicative of two different things. On one hand, parents are probably like, oh, my kid needs a hobby. I'm going to teach him music or whatever, which is awesome. So you're getting the next generation into it. But I also think this is other people who are older and maybe never picked up a guitar in their life, and they're just having this amazing, like, kind of change of life moment where they're like, wow, okay, you know what? I have this time. I could reinvent myself. I could learn something new. So I think either way, that's just a really exciting development. I don't think it necessarily means guitars are back or ever gone. I think people now are re-examining their life and thinking they just need more guitars personally.
Shane, what do you think? Where are you at on this? Do you think the guitar died and came back to life? Do you think that today is Guitar Easter?
I mean, I definitely had no idea that guitars died, and I'm very glad to hear that they came back from the dead before I realized they were. Quarantine is a good time to be bored, and so figure out to do something with yourself. And like, for me being like 12 or 13 in a time just before the whole social media era, there's nothing to do when you're 12 anyway, so just sit inside and play guitar all day. And maybe now this has forced some kids to do that instead of whatever else they're doing now. And so that's great. But yeah, I think on the whole, like, I wouldn't imagine that they ever left. I mean, in terms of like the metal world, you see Kanye West walking around with like a Cradle of Filth long sleeve. So I feel like if anything, there's like a weird new exposure from what's going on. You got Post Malone and Ozzy doing a song together. Like, kids are like, oh yeah, metal's like, all right, I can like that. And like, I can pick up a guitar and do something with that. I mean, I have no connection to the modern world or young people in that. So this is mostly just me seeing something on the internet once every 6 months and hoping everything's going all right. But I don't know. Guitar seems all right. My guitar's not dead. It's alive and well, so I feel good about that.
That's the important part. I think it's like, I think the key thing is like what Dot brought up is that guitars are not the front and center of music. They're still a part of the Queens of the Stone Age and the Foo Fighters and everything. It's like I don't know, when New Wave existed or whatever, they like the guitar didn't die. Those bands still had guitars in them. There's just synth in front of it. Like, it's trying to get new tools to make different types of music. But I guess it's weird to have an instrument that dominates so many different genres, like a guitar. Like guitar solos were like commonplace for so long. So I guess maybe that's where they're going. But that's I don't know. That feels I agree with Katy. That feels just like grandpa, like, rock is dead, man.
I think it's the opposite. I think it's the exact opposite of that. I don't think old men are saying rock is dead. I think it's the younger generation.
You don't know enough old men.
Well, so what I'm saying is sometimes I think if we're too in our own kind of heavy metal underground bubble, we have a skewed perception of what is happening outside of that at large. But in the same way, how remember like in the 90s, like guitar solos weren't cool, even though guitars didn't go away. It was like people were like not playing solos. And I think that was a trend. And I think to a certain degree, maybe what we think of as a rock band, and like I said, you see all these charts and it's 21 Pilots and Imagine Dragons, and you listen to their songs and you're like, there's like one little guitar thing, kind of bluesy thing, and that alters how people perceive it. Or if you turn on any alternative radio station, it's dominated by synths. Yeah, in our world, guitars reign supreme, but that's not necessarily the world at large. That's all I'm saying.
When I mean like an old person being like, oh no, I think it's like every time like guitar solos come back and then they go away, there's an old person freaking out that the guitars are dead. And it's just like, no, it's a phase.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. Like, I just feel for me, there's like this generation beyond ours, or maybe even two of the generations beyond ours, that just insist that there's no good music anymore and there's no good rock music. And these are the people who just stopped listening to music after like 1989.
They have not heard like even To Pimp a Butterfly. And it's like, what are you doing?
I have no idea, what's going on in a lot of the top 40 kind of situations, but even you bringing up like the 80s and, there was a whole like synth sensation then too. And somebody mentioned it earlier, but taste will always kind of wax and wane, but it's never going to go away. I mean, guitar's just like it can do a lot, and it's a really intuitive instrument for like music theory idiots like myself. You can pick it up and figure out how to play a Pantera song and feel pretty good about it.
Yeah.
And so therefore it's always going to have that like accessibility, and people are going to pick it up and do it. I mean, I think Lars Ulrich did his best to kill guitar solos with Saint Anger, and everyone was pretty pissed about it. So
like when I said at the beginning, like, it's no one's ever said the piano is dead, because the piano is now a synth. That's just a different like, just because it isn't the normal tone.
I can argue that the piano is dead in our scene because they just put the piano player on track and that's unemployed. You know what I'm saying? So, well, I'm just saying there's nothing more signifying your instrument is dead than they've automated you. You know, you might as well be like one of those like pickers, those like automated pickers at Amazon. You know, that's so. You know, and the difference is that at one point it was Jerry Lee Lewis setting his piano on fire, and now you just in the back hoping to get a $5 tip. That's all I'm saying. So Code Orange went unplugged this week and put out a live record called Under the Skin, and pretty different for them. They're known, you know, coming out of the metalcore scene, being really heavy and brutal, and they've been very experimental, especially their new album, delving more into electronics. Personally, I love this. To come out of the scene they came out of, their ambition, I think, is really, really high. And I was just really impressed by the presentation. I thought it sounded great. It kind of they reimagined a lot of their songs and presented them in different ways. And I was really impressed by their effectiveness with their vocal harmonies, which, as someone who's done a lot of vocal harmonies and played a lot of acoustic shows, it is not an easy task. So just kind of the technical craftsmanship of everything I thought was really high level. And I don't know, you know, because their fan base is pretty young and heavy. I wonder if they're going to like it. That's kind of the question I ask. Like they're almost, I wonder if they're expanding too fast for their fan base. I don't know. What do you guys think?
You talking about ambition is key here. I don't think there is a younger band, a band that's this young and this like ambitious and high concept. Like they built this. They were like, we can do an MTV Unplugged, and they tried to evoke like the whole aesthetic of like a 2001 MTV Unplugged thing. They got Sonny from Hate 5 6 to like put it together. I think even like putting the Alice in Chains cover in there really evokes like this is like a nostalgia piece from the past. Or if you don't know exactly what we're doing, go look at this. It's like when a movie like evokes like a style from like the 70s or whatever, and people are excited to see it and like track it backwards.
Yeah, I love this. I mean, to me, the standout moment was the Alice in Chains cover. They covered Down the Hole, and it was just really powerful. And I think it was that moment that put everything in perspective to me, and I really understood what they were doing. I don't know. I guess maybe because I didn't actually see the live stream, it didn't quite click. And they nailed it. They even like did the harmonies. I mean, it was excellent. And I think too, it was just really interesting was hearing them kind of reimagine some of their songs acoustically, because some of them were really transformed. And that was just really cool to kind of see the band's innovation and versatility.
I saw this band when they were still the Code Orange kids, when Ethan from Primitive Man ran a DIY space, and they played with, I think it was like Gaza, and they ended up having to play in Ethan's kitchen because something happened with his neighbors or something, and that's where the shows happened for a while. And I remember them being this like, you know, really noisy, like grindcore sort of thing, and they were like 16 maybe at that show. And that's my impression of them. And then over the years, I've just seen that they're like doing WWF and all this stuff. So I'm just like, cool, this is like a resurgence of new metal now, which like, all right, good on them. Somebody's got to do it. And then, so today I was actually excited to like listen to what that even sounds like in 2020. And I learned that it was an acoustic album. So that was like a whole new revelation. I have no idea what to think of it beyond that. I mean, it's the MTV Unplugged thing is definitely right. Like it sent me flashbacks of seeing like Korn or some band like that. Try to like turn these really lowbrow, aggressive, like punch you in the face trailer park anthems into like a coffee shop song. And but I feel like they nailed that aesthetic. Like when you were talking about the MTV Unplugged thing, I was like, this sounds like a resurgence of like 2001. And I hope it works. And I feel like a band like that seems to have a really loyal following, so it might actually have people digging deep. Some of the instrumentation, because it wasn't all pure acoustic, there was definitely some like, you know, clean chorus guitars and stuff like that. And some of those tones actually reminded me of some cool like just 90s rock in general, that in which there was a lot of like actually interesting, decent stuff on the radio. And even back to like 80s, like almost like Cocktail Twins stuff, like in some of the instrumentation and guitars and that part I thought was cool, but I was just like, I have no idea what I'm getting into.
Their influences go way beyond. I think just the heavy stuff. They have their song they open up with "Bleeding in the Blur" really sounds like it could be, like the Pixies or something like that. So they have really diverse influences despite being pretty young. And and there's an edge to it. I don't know what, like I said, I'm interested to see how their fan base is going to react, because they're in this weird position where they released their second album on Roadrunner, and they really pushed the boundaries of what they were doing musically. And then they had this giant tour with Slipknot coming up, and then the pandemic happened, and it kind of, might have really hurt their momentum to really like take their band to the next level. And then, like I said, and through this, they're evolving and becoming different musicians and more diverse musicians. They're one of my favorite newer bands, quote unquote, and everything they do, I think, is always exciting. Whether I'm even on board with it or not, I just like that they take chances.
Musically, they've never been exactly like what I want to hear, but I listen to it every time because it's almost as if the band's whole gimmick or whatever is changing and evolving and their gimmick is change and unabashed confidence, and it's so impressive.
Can we say one thing on this? Basically, Reba's like the lead singer now.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like, it's like they pulled a fast one on us, man. She's killing it.
That does it for us here at Last Words on the Pit. Shane, tell the people where they can find you.
Well, I prefer they don't find me personally, but the record that we're coming out with is October 16th on Profound Lore. It's called A Romance with Violence, and basically if you want to watch a epic and bloody Western movie and then later realize that you actually listen to a metal record, you might like it. Otherwise, you probably won't.
You can follow me at 2 Minutes to Late Night on Instagram, at 2M2LN on Twitter. Katy, plugs.
At Merciful Kate on Twitter and Instagram.
Doc!
And you can find me at Coyle, DOCCOYLE, or www.doccoyle.net.
Please follow us on all social media at We Are The Pit. If you enjoyed this video, check out our podcast. It is an hour-long version of this conversation and includes topics that we didn't even have time to discuss in this video.